All right, so to kick things off, we're the first panel on AI, and as you can tell from our headshots there, we both work at Rhymes. I actually hired Alex to join the team a year ago almost, you joined, right? End of Jan last year. Why don't you start by giving us a little introduction to yourself and how you got into AI?
Definitely. Well, I think I've always been into artificial intelligence. It probably kicked off when I saw iRobot 15 years ago and films like Ex Machina, etc. But it really kicked off when I was thinking about what A-levels I wanted to do. And I thought I'd take a punt on computer science, which ended up leading to me studying and reading computer science and artificial intelligence at university, where I graduated about 5 years ago now, where I got a first class. And I was thinking, what do I want to do afterwards? And it was around the time the pandemic hit, so my graduate program, which was at Accenture, was delayed by a year. And it basically gave me a year to figure out what I wanted to do. And I wish I did some traveling like Matt, but instead I decided to scope out what the market was like in London. So trying to get some work experience, internships, etc. And I ended up working for about 4 different startups as a data science contractor, where I was essentially just trying to understand what it's like to work in industry and apply all of the skills that I had learned at university. And I did some weird things there. One of the startup was essentially Uber for waste removal. Another one was a brand analytics platform, and I did this one internship at a decentralized finance hedge fund where I was building their portfolio management system, and that's when I really realized I really want to work in Fintech. Fast forward a few years, I did my graduate program at Accenture, and this was around the time that ChatGPT hit the mainstream. So generative AI was the thing, it was the hot topic, and based on my experience at university and all of my other interests, etc., I decided, that's where I want to push on with. So I had the privilege of defining the strategy across UK and Ireland for Accenture within generative AI. I got to work on lots of really interesting projects across industries, financial services, retail, telecoms, etc., essentially building out proof of concepts for them to see how they could leverage large language models in their business operations. And I was doing that for about a year or so, and then Theo came knocking with this incredible opportunity at Rhymes, which I haven't looked back since joining. It's been a fascinating year, that's kind of where we are now. And just for context, I'm the lead AI engineer at Rhymes, and Theo is my head of AI product, so I'm going to hand it over.
Thanks. So sometimes people say to me, how did you get into AI? And I'm like, I really don't know how this actually happened. I grew up in a small part of Eastern Canada many years ago. Originally started studying chemistry because I loved high school chemistry. And I think I was walking home from the lab one day thinking, I'm probably just going to end up working on the same reaction for my entire career in the bowels of some lab, never seeing the sun. I thought, maybe chemistry isn't what I want to do. And for some reason, I just decided to become an engineer. Maybe it's because my grandfather was an electrical engineer. I'm not really sure, but I was like, let me check out engineering. So I actually studied mechanical engineering as my undergrad, and did a couple of co-op programs through there. Got a bunch of different work experience, but mostly ended up doing projects for one of the professors. And then I went on to do my master's with him, and I just loved working with him. And he said, you should go do a PhD, you could be a professor, it's an amazing job, you get loads of free time, you get to just play and work on all your favorite topics. And I thought, that sounds good. And he's like, you should probably go somewhere else and do your PhD, like go see the world and then come back. So I was lucky enough to get funding to go to Cambridge to do my PhD in jet engine design, actually, which at the time I didn't actually know that much about. Eventually figured out how to finish that. But at that point, I was sort of just sat in a room by myself every day being like, what problem are you trying to solve? And I was like, I miss people. And I think what I loved about my master's was the relationship. Like it was more like a team. And so I started talking to some friends, and somebody said, you should go work at a bank. And I was like, I'm an engineer, why would I work at a bank? And then I looked at the website, sure enough, they wanted engineering people. So I did an internship at Goldman Sachs in the summer of 2008 in the equities electronic trading business, and I found it fascinating. This was a whole new world that I knew nothing about. I learned so much, and then I thought, this is what I want to do next. And so I finished my PhD and then went back and worked at Goldman Sachs for 8 years in that business. And I guess I was sort of the interface between the clients and the technology, and I think that's sort of where I eventually realized my sweet spot was. So I was I was writing some code, I was customizing trading algorithms for clients, I was analyzing how they were using them, were they pushing the right buttons at the right time, was there something different we could do for them? And I did that for a while, and then I got bored of the corporate culture. And I went to a company called Palantir, which is an amazing tech company, and I was there for 8 years, had a lot of fun there, working across many different industries. In manufacturing, I worked with Airbus for 3 years, like wandering around the final assembly line, super cool. NHS, also very cool to have a consultant in Scrubs giving you feedback on the application that you've built for them. Then I did some stuff with the Ministry of Defense. And then I thought it's been a while here, and I think 8 years maybe is my cycle time, I don't know. And I called up my original boss from the internship, who was my boss at Goldman, who's the guy that I'm working for now. And so going back to that point about networking, you need to have people to call at some point. And I joined, and he said, do you want to be head of AI? And I was like, sure. And then basically I'd spent that sort of summer of 23 looking for a job and just experimenting and doing courses online and talking to people and getting really excited. But I really didn't have any actual experience at all, but I had a passion for it and I had some tools and I could talk to people about it. And I guess that's sort of how I ended up with this job. So we were just talking a little bit now about like what is AI and the difference between Gen AI and normal AI, because it's been around forever, yet why all of a sudden is it so popular?
That's a great question and a great journey as well into AI. Really interesting. I like to think of AI and how I was taught about AI at university is, artificial intelligence is this big umbrella under which lots of other technologies fall, right? So it's really a broad discipline that's concerned with creating systems that can execute on tasks, perform tasks as standard of a human, right? Tasks like speaking a language or understanding language or recognizing patterns or problem solving, as it were. And that's kind of artificial intelligence as a whole. And then you have machine learning, which essentially is a subset of artificial intelligence that focuses more on developing algorithms and statistical models to allow these computer systems to learn from data and make decisions based off of that underlying data. So essentially, machine learning is a method that allows computers to learn from experiences. And there's an analogy that I really like that always stuck with me, which was, if artificial intelligence is an ice cream shop, then machine learning is like a particular flavor of ice cream, right? And then you've got generative AI, which is the hot topic the last few years, transformers, etc. I know they've been around for years. If you've been in NLP, I apologize. A lot of my NLP engineers, they're annoyed that generative AI is now this hot topic. But yeah, generative AI is essentially this specialized branch of machine learning that leverages specific AI models to generate new content, right? So, these models, as I'm sure most of you are most familiar with, large language models like Claude, GPT, etc., they can learn the underlying patterns of structures of input data, and then they use that knowledge to produce original output data, right? So if you take an example of a large language model, the input data will be text, and it will generate new output textual data, which resembles that of a human, right? And then you have diffusion models as another example, which are image models. They take an image input data and they generate new original output imagery data. So just to summarize, I've got my summaries here, AI is the overarching field that focuses on simulating human intelligence in machines. Machine learning is a method within AI that enables systems to learn from data and improve over time. And then you have generative AI, which is a branch of machine learning that specializes in generating new data. So, there are lots of other paradigms when you dive into each of them, but I'm going to save that for your lecturers. Like, I don't want to get into supervised machine learning, reinforcement learning, etc. But they're all cool topics. I'm more than happy to chat afterwards as well about them if you're interested.
Great, thanks. Good introduction there, because I think if you said your friends who've been studying NLP, or people who've built companies that have done all this sort of text scraping and PDF parsing, they basically threw it all out and started again like 2 years ago. But I guess one of the hot topics recently, and I think something that I know you're particularly passionate about, Alex, is agents. And can you sort of talk a little bit about like what an agent is and what you think the potential for agents?
Yeah, I think I've been battering on about agents ever since we joined last year, saying that it's going to be the future, and now it's really coming into fruition. I'm not sure if any of you guys saw the OpenAI operator announcement last night. Yeah, exactly. It's coming to the frontier. But essentially, the concept of agents and agentic large language models is becoming increasingly relevant as we move towards systems that don't just passively generate information like large language models, but actively engage in tasks autonomously. So it's that next frontier, right? It's that next innovation on it. You have traditional large language models like GPT, like Claude, like Gemini, etc., that excel at understanding and generating human language based on large-scale training data, but their primary function is quite reactive. They respond to prompts, and that's pretty much it. Like, they summarize data, or they can rewrite an email. It's very good at doing that, but they require human input to initiate on tasks. So, the way I think about these models is that, they only answer questions in a one-directional interaction, right? They don't take independent actions. Now, that's where agents come in. That's how agents are so powerful, because on the other hand, they operate on a more autonomous level. Now, I like thinking about agents. Imagine, a traditional large language model that's been given a driver's license and a key to a car. They can just go around and do whatever they want, which could be quite scary, but it could also be incredibly powerful for businesses, particularly in finance. So, these agentic large language models aren't just passive tools responding to human queries. They can initiate tasks, they can initiate actions, and they can make decisions based on predefined goals and autonomously execute on tasks in a very structured environment. So they really combine both language understanding with decision-making capabilities. And I think that's the key point here, right? It's autonomy, it's interacting with external environments dynamically, and it's decision-making capabilities as well. And like just to deviate a little bit with the operator, did you check that out yesterday? Okay, we need to talk about that. But what they're doing is incredible, because I'm not sure if you guys saw Devon AI as well. That was launched about 6 months ago. They're basically giving these large language models the capabilities to control an operating system on your computer. So like, let's say you wanted to, book a table for dinner was the example they used in the video yesterday. It's so interesting how they do it. Instead of what you would assume is, plugins, APIs, etc., what they're doing is they're taking snapshots of a browser which is hosted in a cloud, using GPT-4o's vision capabilities to comprehend what's on the screen from that snapshot, understand the pixels, and then give it the power, the actions, and the tools to be able to control the web browser, just like we do with a keyboard, with a mouse. And that way, if you ask, book me a table, it will go out and do it in the cloud autonomously. It's incredible. It's incredible. Anyway, yeah.
Sounds good. Travel booking is something I'm looking forward to. Right?
Yeah,
It's just like,
exactly.
find me all the options for hotels that are, in the kind of place that I like to stay, because at least it'll get to know what you like or the kind of restaurants you like, kind of thing. But yeah, we're supposed to be talking about finance, right?
That leads me to a question. So yeah, with a specific lens on finance, and like your experience at Goldman, your experience at Rhyme is perfect for this. Can you tell me, for an organization or for people in the audience, what are the financial specific considerations to take into account when you want to leverage AI within a business?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first one is probably, can you trust it, right? Like, if you're going to have an autonomous agent that's going to put a trade on your behalf, or make an investment decision, or even summarize the results of your recent investment performance, you want to make sure that it's right. And I think that's one of the things that people have sort of struggled with, because LLMs just make stuff up. I listened to this podcast the other day, and the guy was like, I'm not sure why people are surprised that they hallucinate. That's sort of like the only thing they do is they make things up. And sometimes they resemble things that have happened in the past, or things that are true, but they're basically just all made up stuff, right? And so I think that's another example where agent things can come in, because you could have, for instance, one LLM summarize the performance, and you can have another one check its work. Or you can give the same tasks to multiple agents and see if do they all come up with the same answer, then there's probably a higher confidence in this kind of thing. So we have seen people doing that. using AIs, multiple LLMs for summarizing performance reports. But usually they have a human in the loop, and I think that's something that particularly probably for the next 5 years or so, we're always going to want to have a human, sanity checking their work. So maybe the agent says, hey, I found you this table, would you like me to book it? And you're like, no, it's in Birmingham and I'm in London today, so like, no, kind of thing. Or, yes, actually that's perfect. But just having that human to sort of validate it, I think is kind of key. And most of the applications I've seen of AI in finance, the compliance departments never trust it to actually fully automate. So like that's sort of one consideration. But there's actually huge scope as well, and I think thinking of the space of unstructured data, right? So a lot of finance for years has been driven off, tables of data, streams of data about prices and things like that from, listed securities or even, bonds and things like that. But there's so much information that's in PDFs about, investor reports and things like that, and getting into the private asset space, so like information about real estate or, bridges or things like that, and it's just like that's not traditional structured data, and so there's so much scope there, but then again it has to be right, and so there's a lot of sort of work being done to sort of figure out how do you use AI to get you most of the way, but still leaving the space for that human to actually do the last sort of 5% or to validate the results that are coming out. Should we talk about rhymes?
Let's talk about rhymes.
Let's talk about rhymes. Okay, so rhymes I've never heard of until I joined. And what Rhymes does is we take any data that basically an asset manager or an asset owner, so an asset owner might be a pension fund, say, anything that they need to sort of do their day-to-day business. So it's a lot of price data. So traditionally, when the company was started, which was like 28 years ago, it was mostly index and benchmark data. So think like the FTSE 100 price, the S&P 500 price, that kind of thing. And when I first heard about this company, I was like, why does it exist? Because surely that's like one number, like it's not hard. And then I was like, well actually, it's not one number, it's 100 numbers because there's 100 things that go into it, and there's prices and weights, so it's 200 numbers. And even still, an asset manager doesn't use one of these things a day, they use thousands of them a day from 15 different providers, 50 different providers, however many. We have 900 data partners that we get data from every day. And on any given day, the probability that it all works correctly is 0, right? And so we exist to sort of be that layer between, to deal with all the crap, to fix all the problems, and just give our clients a nice steady stream of data that's usable in the format that they want. And it turns out they love us, which was super fun, because at Palantir we had a massive publicity problem, and every client you went into, they would start off being like, I don't trust you. And at Rhymes, everybody's happy to see you. So it's super fun, actually. Do you want to give us a little bit of a description of the AI journey that we've had so far at Rhymes, though? Because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I joined, I think we were quite, I wouldn't say immature, but we were quite early on in our thinking with AI. We've done a few experiments here and there, and I think one of your first initiatives, Theo, was launching the AI lab, right? Essentially, the lab provides a dedicated environment where the team, the AI team specifically, in collaboration with our clients, which tend to be asset managers, asset owners, hedge funds, etc., can prototype new ideas and applications using proven AI technology and Rhymes' data in a safe environment. And because the AI landscape is very dynamic and evolving very quickly, we use the AI lab a lot as a sandbox for rapid iterations with clients, right? So, I think one example, and I think this was our flagship product, as it were, was the Rhymes Lakehouse Copilot. Now, what that is, Ryan and Faye, I'm looking at you, I know you both know what it is. It's a text-to-SQL Copilot, which essentially allows our clients, who might not be the most technically skilled people in the world, to interact with our Rhymes data using natural language, right? So essentially the workflow is, you ask a question on top of your data, let's say, what accounts am I holding Apple? And our AI model, which we're using GPT-4o at the moment, we've obviously evolved throughout their releases, will take the sentiment of the question, do a couple of intelligent things, and figure out a SQL query, generate a SQL query, which is then executed against our SQL database, and produces the response. Now that sounds very simple when you describe it from the beginning, but the evolution and the learnings that we've gone in the last year of figuring out how to optimize, how to improve performance, how to balance, the opportunity cost between latency versus accuracy, how to sell it. All of these things are an incredible learning experience for us. And I mean, I can dive a bit more deeply into the evolution, if that's of interest. Well, I mean, we started off very simple with a static schema generation, where essentially we pumped everything, all of the context into the prompt itself. That's sent directly to the large language model. So the schema, the instructions, the underlying data, etc. Now you can imagine that was very slow, very, very slow. And if you have a client who's trying to get an answer from this copilot, and it's taking 3 minutes for it to produce a response, and that response could be utter nonsense, it's not very useful. And so a large focus when I joined was, okay, how can we speed this thing up, and how can we make it more accurate? And that's where we introduce a few techniques like dynamic schema retrieval based on the environments we're operating in. It's where we introduce a multi-mode approach, where we would give the client the ability to switch between and toggle between a fast mode versus an accurate mode. Now the underlying tech behind that was very simple. It's using a 3.5 model, which was rapid, versus a 4 model, which was super slow but much more accurate. And now we've, in the last 4 or 5 months, have been focusing on agentic framework. So how can we figure out a way that we can change the architecture from how we have it now and modernize it to include certain things like self-fixing components, where we have an LLM evaluate its own response. So a lot of the time we would find these large language models would hallucinate and generate a table or a column name which never existed. So the SQL it would produce would never be able to execute, and you just have all of these errors being thrown. And so one of the guys in the team thought, okay, why don't we just create an agentic flow where we have an evaluator large language model that looks at the model generating the SQL, and every time it creates an error, for it to address that error and then retry multiple times. And what we found is that that's drastically improved the accuracy of the copilot. So it's lots of little things that have taken part in this evolution of the copilot.
Thanks a lot. Do we have time for a couple questions now? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, guys. Excellent.
You've got a computer science degree, you're very clever. For someone who doesn't have a computer science degree or kind of a technical background, how can they break into AI?
It's so easy to do now more than ever, given the amount of resources which you can get online. I was reading an article the other day, and it was saying how the number of applicants, this was just an American study, the amount of applicants to the universities in America are falling drastically, and it's directly correlated to all of the resources which are free and readily available to everyone. So what I always advise to people is just go online, type in whatever topic you're interested in. If it's AI, generative AI, machine learning, whatever it is, you're going to have a plethora of resources there. Like personally, I used Code Academy when I was in my gap year between school and university, just to kind of freshen up on coding, and it helped me so much. Udemy is another great resource. Deep Learning is another great resource. There are just so many. Even YouTube. Like I get most of my AI news from YouTube. I don't know what you guys think of that, but I find it super useful.
It's very difficult to predict the landscape of where AI is going to head, and more so its impact on your business. But are there any things that us as outsiders from the industry should probably be looking out for that you might have privy knowledge to? So, to summarize, where do you think AI is going to go, and how is it going to impact your business in the future?
Great question. Do you want to take it? I'll say one quick thing there. I mean, I've been on the agent hype for the last year and a half, and that's finally coming to fruition. I think we're just going to see more and more of that, right? Like, I think over the next year, 2 years, we're going to start to see much more intelligent applications being developed that take components like large language models or diffusion models, that take agent concepts and essentially consolidate them into one really super intelligent mechanism that you could apply to any field, any industry, any particular task problem. So that's kind of what I would be thinking about. How can I aggregate all of these new trends which are coming out and try and take a step back to see how would they work together cohesively in a business context.
But I think your point about what does this mean for business and how do you plan knowing that you have no idea what's going to happen, right? And I think the AI lab and this idea of being nimble is sort of a key part of this. And our team, like I think from when I first joined, my boss was like, your team is a special ring-fence team that can do whatever they want as fast as they want, and you can throw everything away 6 months later, you can experiment. And so I think it's just that making sure that you're able to be nimble and pivot and don't say like, okay, we're going to have a 10-year project to invest in the best AI today because it'll be not the best AI tomorrow, and so just being able to sort of make sure that you can pivot and keep experimenting.
Probably hear me. So you mentioned how agents help with hallucinations of AI, and there's also an issue of like bias in the data set itself. Do you think agents can help combat that issue as well?
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I have to echo that I don't know. I really don't know because, you know, I was reading again another fact saying that 90% of all content online will be artificially generated by 2026, which if you think about the knock-on effect, if all of that underlying data that we're using to pre-train these models has been artificially generated, then you can see that regression to the mean, right? Now, how do you clean that? How do you cleanse that? How do you prevent it? I'm not too sure. Potentially agents, potentially. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that. It's a great question.
Thank you, Bill.
Question about agentic AI. So you mentioned that no matter how much AI progresses and it develops, you will still always need a human to kind of like push it over the line and kind of finish it. Do you think AI will ever reach a threshold where you can fully trust it to do whatever, maybe agentic AI? And what does that threshold look like?
Depends on your appetite for risk. Like some people would be willing to do it right now, right? You look at these quant funds, like quant hedge funds, algorithmic trading, they are essentially allowing these machine learning models to make trading-based strategies and to execute on those strategies autonomously. So their appetite for risk is high, so they're ready to go right now, whereas people in our position, particularly when you're working for like banks, which you're dealing with sensitive data, then you have to be somewhat more cautious about the level of autonomy that you give these agents. Yeah.
I think yes, and I think I was listening to a podcast with the people who started Cursor AI the other day, and they were saying that like in 5 to 10 years you can probably trust it. But I think it also depends on the models, and something we haven't mentioned is small language models. And so rather than having one big mega model that can answer any question about anything, whether it's cooking or investments or whatever, analyzing a table of data, there's sort of a trend towards having sort of smaller models that are specialists in particular things. They're much faster, they're much cheaper, and they can be much more accurate. So like as you sort of like go from some Uber thing that's kind of okay at everything, and you train something to be really good at one particular thing, I think then you can trust it more.
One more question.
I think the last question was just here in the front.
Since we're talking about agents, I was wondering do you think the language would stay around in the future? So you see people are learning all types of coding languages at the moment, and then I'm wondering if AI could potentially do everything by itself. So do you think that, let's say, JavaScript would stay around for the future, or do you think that it would just be an agent and really develop to the stage?
Yes, good question. So in case you didn't hear about the question is, do you think we're actually going to need languages and coding languages once AI can just do everything? I think so, because you still need some sort of instruction. You need an instruction layer for the machine, right? Now, whether it's JavaScript or some lower level language, I don't know, but I think you definitely need some sort of layer to give the instructions.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. I think it's a great question, philosophical, I like it. It's really interesting because, as Theo said, you always need programming languages to infer whatever actions that they need to infer. If it's JavaScript for front end, if it's Python for statistics, whatever it might be. I think the way in which you guys should think about it, and we should think about how humans engineer these applications, will change drastically, right? You take prompt engineering as an example. If you said that to somebody 50 years ago when programming just was started, that you would be programming by speaking a natural language to instruct a model to then generate other programming languages, it will probably blow their minds. So I think the way in which we interact with coding and programming is going to change drastically. But the underlying programming languages will probably remain.
Cool. Put your hands together for Theo and Alex. Thank you, I learned a few things there.